Welcome back, and now we are at the finale of the James Bond style analysis series. This is part 3, so check out part 1 and 2 on my channel. If you love the things we're doing related to the style analysis of James Bond films, then check out my channel for more things related to fashion and fashion history. I've done a lot of fashion history videos and I have a couple playlists on those, so if you're interested, go check those out. And also subscribe, and if we can get this channel to at least 1,000 subscribers, I'll be letting my viewers pick what kind of video topic we'll be doing on this channel next. And I would obviously love to have so much more support than that from you guys, but if we can get it to at least 1,000 first, which is my goal, I'm hoping we can do bigger things from there. So now we move into the era of Timothy Dalton. The Living Daylights, 1987. According to Glenn, Dalton's engagement with the costumes began in the very first wardrobe consultation, and when Bond wasn't wearing the obligatory tux, Dalton wanted a more casual look, perhaps more in keeping with the times, specifically requesting a leather jacket. This is very radical for the times because other than Moore's safari suits, there's really been no one who wanted to wear something so casual. It is ironic that although Dalton wanted a more casual look for Bond, the actor would be costumed in 3 different dinner suits for the movie. However, Dalton stated, "This Bond may wear a black dinner jacket, but he prefers off-the-peg clothes from Bond Street or King's Road," according to Jeffrey Aguilera Ross. And according to Jeffrey Ross, Dalton refused to change outfits for every scene as if in a fashion parade like Moore was. Moore was a lot more fashion conscious and wanted a lot more. Emma Porteous returned as costume designer and confirmed that Dalton has chosen dark colors and wears only white shirts. If he puts on a tie, there's no noticeable pattern. He wants all of his clothes cut fashionably big and loose. It is also at this point too, I don't know because it was never mentioned for Moore's movies, but 12 copies of each suit were made for the stuntmen to wear. So at this point, I start seeing a lot more in my research that large amounts of suits are being produced for the show, whereas before there was only a couple produced. Like, for example, when we first started talking about Sean Connery, there was 2 to 3 suits max per scene. One for Simmons, his stuntman, and one for Sean Connery, and maybe like a third. Now they have 12 copies of each suit, whereas before it was just 2 to 3. And these were made just for the stuntmen to wear, because it seems like the action scenes are getting a lot more advanced and a lot more complicated. And so there's an increased need for production. And so with that comes that they can't have as much of this super high quality, fine, finished, polished suit, and they have to rely more on either made-to-measure or mass-produced suits. The first dinner suit worn in the scene at the beginning of the film when Bond meets Saunders in a concert hall in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia, was actually created for Dalton to wear in the film Brenda Starr, produced immediately before Living Daylights. The Berman's and Nathan's label stitched into the jacket collar indicates that it is costume 3 for Brenda Starr, so they literally borrowed stuff. And it was made in color 4926. The reason for Dalton wearing a dinner suit created for another film is likely because the scene was changed during the production of the film. In the draft screenplay, Bond meets Saunders in a bookstore, not in a concert hall, and the script directs that Bond is dressed as a tourist as opposed to in evening dress. Because of this, the line delivered by Saunders to Bond in the latter's arrival to the hall,
"You're bloody late. This is a mission, not a fancy dress ball,"
end quote, offers a double entendre and a sly recognition of the dinner suit having been produced for Brenda Starr. It has been speculated by Nick Sullivan that Dalton's suits were selected from ready-to-wear ranges in keeping with Dalton's request. If so, an off-the-peg 2-piece suit would cost around £115 at the time the film was produced, which is extremely cheap because if you remember Hayward, he was in the 70s or 80s charging like 700 or 800 British pounds per single suit. This is only 115 because it's off the peg. Anecdotally, Glenn revealed that Dalton wasn't a man that likes suits with too many pads in them. He likes something that feels comfortable, and recalled, in fact, on a couple of occasions he was known to rip pads literally out of the suits if you weren't careful, and having just spent £1,000 on a suit, you really don't want the pads being pulled out of it. Glenn is likely referring to the Ralph Lauren 3-piece suit. So this guy, Timothy Dalton, he really seems like he's much more laid back than Roger Moore, and he even feels like he's similar to Sean Connery in a way with his approach towards dressing, because if you remember at the beginning, Sean Connery really does not really care for tailored things. He just wants things off the peg, especially like with his John Lobb shoes and his suits. And Timothy Dalton seems to be the same, except Timothy Dalton also wants to be even more casual by wearing some more modern clothing like a leather jacket. He doesn't feel like he needs to be fully suited up in order to play his role. He also opts for something that's more casual and comfortable, the comfort aspect, over something that's more formal, because he literally does not want the shoulder pads, which to me screams someone who's more minimal. For the bulk of the costumes needed for the scene set in Afghanistan, 2 local charities were commissioned to produce items of clothing from 1,500 meters of camouflage and sand-colored cotton. For the female lead, Kara, Handy sourced a flamboyant shalwar kameez of apple green and cherry pink colors, covered in embroidery and made from Japanese polyester. This costume would not be used in the film, however. Glenn requested to Porteous that the costumes worn by the character needed to be designed with the position of Kara's legs in mind, as she was a cellist, and so for that reason, costumes 1, 2, 5, and 9 were designed to accommodate this. Costume 1 is a boat-necked black dress with a slim bodice, 3/4 length fitted sleeves, and a full pleated A-line skirt. Costume 2 is a sheer white silk turtleneck blouse and long black woolen pleated skirt, which she wears under a full-length pale gray trench coat with wide notched labels and padded shoulders and long black vent. Costume 5 is a long dressing gown described by Porteous as being made from pale blue-gray silk and includes a shawl collar with contrasting white silk. The skirt of the gown itself is a circular cut, so it drapes flowing out and it's not super tight to the legs, with a slit in the side. And then the 9th costume for this cellist is a long, full-length silk gown in a salmon pink color. And as a cellist, you really do need something that's long and loose, because you're literally spreading your legs to put a large piece of wood between your legs. And in the lobby dress shop, another version of the dress for that Porteous designed was a deep blue silk coat to match the dress, embroidered with tiny crystal tassels. In the film, the dress appears in a Cartier boutique. This leads to the most glamorous scenes in the film, and likely the most expensively costumed, the Vienna opera scene with Kara. One of the other costumes, costume 7, Porteous writes that it included a line-striped cotton shirt worn with cotton trousers, or boots worn with Afghan costume. This directly reflects the colors of Bond's costume in the scene, as opposed to the khaki and green Russian uniforms worn by General Kostkov and his henchmen. And with these colors, Kara is actually visually aligning herself and her empathy towards Bond. License to Kill, 1989. Tillen is the costume designer, and she worked on the pilot series of the American crime drama Miami Vice. It was her approach to costuming this show that would directly influence her costume decisions in License to Kill. Tillen adopted an unusual color palette to dress the male leads. She dressed them in the colors of pink, mauve, and buttercup yellow, and wearing trousers without belts and shoes without socks. Which is an abomination! Why would you dress men without socks? At least wear no-show socks. Levine argued that Miami Vice possessed some of the coolest, fashiest, trendiest men's clothing ever seen on small screens. Tillen explained that the colors were directly inspired by the Miami location. Aqua, water, sand, lavender, aqua, and turquoise buildings. We used that as the show's palette, carrying it through to the cars and sets. She argued that it was okay for men to enjoy fashion and wear color. They're not threatened by it anymore. It doesn't mean that you're any less of a man if you wear lavender. It's just a shade. I really do applaud her progressive thinking, but in the history of Bond films, it seemed to me that they're not really very adventurous with color. Don't think this would be the best place for her to try that, but also because I don't think that, based on how they view masculinity and femininity in the Bond franchise, because they are very conservative about those views, gendered views, it didn't seem to me either like they would be more accepting of like more progressive masculinity wearing colors too. So unfortunately, I feel like that was just kind of sad, because she wanted to express her creativity more, but she couldn't because of what her clients didn't want in their views of gender. Though the script may have been tailor-made for Dalton, Tillen's initial approach towards costuming Bond caused tension. Tillen explained the Bond people have very specific ideas, and on occasion they've had to pull the reins in because I was stepping out of line with what Bond is. And what Bond is the most important thing. It took a while for me to get my creativity to work with their vision. Dalton would later complain of her ideas.
She wanted to put me in pastels. Can you imagine? I thought, no, we can't have that. The clothes say so much about Bond. He's got a naval background. He needs a strong, simple color like dark blue. I cut the wardrobe down by 3 colors. Bond was never flash or ostentatious.
I do understand that part of the idea of Bond not being flash or ostentatious is due to Timothy being a little bit more of a casual, laid-back character in how he dresses, especially when you compare him to Roger Moore. But also, it does seem like it doesn't necessarily quite fit Bond to have pastels. But I do understand that men can wear a variety of things, and just because he's personally opposed to pastels doesn't mean he couldn't ever wear them in another film that wasn't Bond. I think if it was given the right circumstances, I think Tillen should be able to dress men in whatever colors she wants, including pastels. The more fashion and avant-garde styles have not fitted his image as well. So I can also see where Timothy Dalton is coming from, so I can see both sides of the argument. Tillen was more diplomatic in regards to her and Dalton's disagreement, saying, quote, "Timothy has a very clear vision of whom he believes the character to be. He's a very rough and tumble kind of guy. He likes things to be real, to reflect what's happening to him. So we had to make sure we had 5 or 6 sets of clothes that are progressively dirtier or sweatier for the appropriate shots." End quote. By the time of License to Kill, the Bond films demanded that there was at least 35 copies of each suit due to action scenes, and therefore a little tailor who's cutting suits from very traditional cloth could never cope with that. It would be far too expensive with production on a small scale. Cosgrave admitted, apparently without irony, Bond wears the same dinner suit in 2 casino sequences and in the final scene of the film. Due to this, many copies of the dinner suit would have to have been sourced or made, especially due to the action it received, including being drenched in water after Bond leaps into a swimming pool. Therefore, the suit of unknown provenance would have likely been sourced from a ready-to-wear range or costumers, local 705. And I never realized this about film until I read this book, and it really opened my eyes. They must have a lot of these backup suits on hand, because when you're redoing scenes or reshooting things, you probably can't go directly from filming a wet scene to a dry scene all in the same suit as fast, because then you would have to wait for the suit to dry, and that's production time that you're losing. So you probably have another backup suit that's the same suit but is dry on hand to change into. Or if you're like fighting and the suit's supposed to show like tears, because naturally when you're fighting sometimes your clothes get badly beaten up. But this just doesn't quite necessarily make sense to me either, is like why they started only introducing this now and why they didn't have it in some of the earlier things for Bond, or if it really was just that Sean Connery was not involved in as many action scenes as Timothy Dalton and Roger Moore was. From this moment forth with Timothy Dalton, they start shifting to made to measure instead of tailor-made and bespoke, and then at the very end with Daniel Craig where they start fully going to full-blown off the peg. I'll get into that a little bit further. The white shirt has a spread collar and striped bib with a placket front that includes 4 onyx studs, which, remember, if I mentioned earlier, one of the other movies also had a shirt with 4 onyx studs. And this is also the only time in the franchise that Bond has worn such a shirt. The onyx studs are used to mirror the ones that are included in Franz Sanchez's dress shirt. Davy explained that he and Dalton had consulted Fleming's Casino Royale and discussed that they wanted the hero and villain to mirror each other in terms of character. It's a heavyweight title match. Bring Bondian elements to the villain and villainous elements to Bond. You had a shared nuance. Kind of like yin and yang. The inclusion of onyx studs on both shirts is a visual embodiment of this. At Felix Leiter's wedding to Della Churchill, he has an outfit that includes a white carnation in the buttonhole, a direct reference to Lazenby's wedding attire on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And then later on, we also see Daniel Craig do the same thing in his outfit. Unlike Dalton, Davy was unable to escape Tillen's Miami Vice influenced choices, with the designer insisting that Sanchez wore pink, and Sanchez is the villain. Robert in real life is a man's man, and I wanted to put him in an orchid shirt with gray trousers. This caused some trepidation initially, but he is so male that he looked beautiful. And in an apparent aid aimed at Dalton, Tillen praised Davy, who made it work for him. He realized it was just a color. It doesn't change who he actually is. Thus, the Miami Vice theme becomes ironically flipped in License to Kill, with the villain wearing what was at the time synonymous with male heroes' clothing. Sullivan has argued that the distinction between the hero and the villain in the 1980s Bond films became less obvious, and it was the villain who adopted the designer brands influenced by the prevailing Hollywood style movies of the day, such as American Gigolo, which not only catapulted Richard Gere to fame, but his designer Giorgio Armani too. This particular approach is clearest in License to Kill, and Sullivan describes Sanchez as being the ideal Miami smoothie dressed down in pastel knits and flowing silk shirts. Sanchez is first costumed in a blue long linen jacket with wide notched lapels. Underneath the jacket, he wears a white cotton shirt with an unfastened collar. This would be a recurring motif in Sanchez's costumes, as with Bond's onyx stud fastenings. So on one hand, we have the villain wearing pastels and beautiful variety of colors, and on the other hand, we always have Bond, who's also just wearing his plain neutral colors and navy. But a classic is always a classic. And then there was Pam, who was one of the Bond girls. Although her character can be understood as progressive within the Bond films, and that Bond is reliant on her in the film to assist him in a bar fight, for which she has come better prepared to provide weapons after Bonds have been taken. But Lowell later reflects, I remember the casting description was, it's a Bond girl, but she was different from all the other Bond girls. She's tough and in charge, and when you first meet her, she's out with the guys. I put on my jeans and a pair of cowboy boots, a leather jacket, and a t-shirt and went to the audition. They took one look at my costume, and it was on a Friday, and they said, you have to come back on Monday. You can't audition for a Bond film in this costume. You have to wear something tight and sexy. So I spent the weekend going to really cheesy contemporary casual stores, and I found this pink lame zip-up halter neck top dress that sort of zipped all the way up, and it was really fitted and only probably cost $9.99. And that's what I wore to the audition on Monday, and they loved it. End quote. This quote really just kind of makes me a little bit disgusted, and it's kind of hypocritical because they're saying that she's a boy's boy, so why can't she wear what normal women usually wear? If you wanted to wear something you're comfortable with and you're hanging around guys, it would typically be just a t-shirt and jeans and a leather jacket. But due to that not being sexy enough as a Bond girl, they wanted the boy's boy to be sexy. And that just doesn't necessarily make sense that they would make her wear something sexier and tighter, and they just loved the pink lame dress. Like, not even the fact only that it's tight, but it was pink. It's like Barbie. I'm sorry, I keep comparing this to Barbie. I know it's not Barbie, but I can just see a lot of things in similarity to Barbie here, where there are gender issues within like the conservative nature of the franchise. It almost seems unfair because it's like they're trying to make it seem like they don't only cast Bond girls as this one particular sexy type. They're trying to make some of them intelligent and some of them more masculine and make it seem like some of them actually do keep up with the boys, but then they can't because of these things that they're doing to treat women differently from men. As per Lowell's audition dress, the majority of Pam's costumes would include halter necks, although Tillen argued even when Pam becomes glamorous, there is a function to the glamour that still has a lean and closed style. After convincing Bond to let her assist him in his mission, he tells her,
well, if you're going to stay and be my executive secretary, you better look the part. Buy yourself some decent clothes.
The script offers the direction of her costume and the scene that follows.
She wears an elegant executive secretary suit.
The suit worn by Pam in the scene is actually a navy and white silk dress, which is designed to appear as though a typical power suit, prominent in fashion during the 1980s, with the shoulder pads. In keeping with the glamorous but functional brief afforded by the character, Tillen designed which would later be termed the infamous rip-away hem dress. This was because the character would later need to be able to run in the dress. It had to be multi-layered so Lowell could just remove the bottom hem of it, and this was Glenn's idea. Tillen and the wardrobe department used trial and error in order to achieve this. First, they attempted to create a detachable seam with Velcro, which is smart. That's what I would have done and started with. However, this cotton created lumps. You probably know, like when you Velcro something together, it waves a little bit and can be bumpy because the Velcro can like kind of pucker. But this was a problem because the seams needed to be invisible in order to provide a reveal to the audience. Kind of takes the illusion away if you can see that it's detachable. Following this, they tried over 160 different fasteners, but these all created a ridge. And since the dress was made out of faceted beads, the ridge picked up the light because the beads bounce off light. More ridges were created, making them appear similar to the Swarovski crystal beads. And then Tillen reflected that it was very exciting when it finally worked. That for me was the most challenging thing. When a director needs something to behave in a certain way, and you try and retain the style and keep the integrity of the outfit while it fulfills its function. End quote. The shoes that were worn were actually from YSL. Lowell later complained of the dress.
It weighed a ton. One of my fittings, I got zipped into it and my skin got caught in the zipper, which was excruciatingly painful.
That is super painful. And they had to cut it off of her. Underneath the dress, Pam actually wears a lace garter with a leg holster, which was specifically designed by Tillin, the costume designer, to hold the character's .25 Beretta 950. Lupe is the abused and long-suffering mistress of Sanchez, the villain, and in the casino scenes, she wears a vibrant floor-length dress sourced from Oscar de la Renta and was adapted for Soto actress's figure. The gown's color by Oscar de la Renta was called Fire Engine Red, but it actually became known as Nancy Reagan Red after she wore the gown at a fundraising event. With some of the reception of License to Kill, Adam Mars Jones complained of Lowell as, although in their first scene together she turns out to have a bigger gun than Bond, cue the knowing laughter, she is soon relegated to the role of a decorative backup. Although she has never been mannish in the slightest degree, Bond instructs her to buy proper clothes. She retaliates by having her hair cut glamorously short, but slides meekly enough into cocktail dresses and the emotions that go with them. I think this is actually a very fair reception by Adam because, like I said, it seems like they just wanted to make it seem like they were being more progressive, but the Bond franchise on its own just seems super conservative in their gender values. GoldenEye 1995 with Pierce Brosnan as the next James Bond. It was at Hemming's insistence that Brioni, the Italian menswear couture house, credited with tailoring bespoke suits for clients such as Robert Kennedy, Nelson Mandela, and Prince of Wales, was offered the contract to tailor Brosnan's suits. As with earlier designers, Hemming is also endorsing with the inaccurate belief that Bond wears Savile Row suits. Part of the reason behind Hemming's decision to use Brioni was due to the demands of producing a large number of suits in the short amount of time required for filming units based on different countries working at the same time. Brioni is a very large company, which is also one of the reasons why they picked them. Brioni had 18 master tailors, 18 second-class tailors, and 10 women employed for buttonholes, 10 women to line suit canvases, and 10 women specializing in trousers. And this is a very massive firm, especially when you compare it to Hayward's firm, which was probably only a few people. A small firm versus a medium firm is kind of the difference we're looking at here. Though on the side of even being possibly a large tailoring firm, they're kind of going beyond medium even. Brioni reportedly produced 12 to 17 versions of each of Brosnan's suits for GoldenEye, which, compare that to Sean Connery, at the beginning they only had 2 to 3. On top of this, Hemming explained, we had to hold spares to replace the damaged clothes and brand new suits in case Pierce has to reshoot earlier scenes. So even with 12 to 17 suits, they're still being conservative, which is crazy. Hemming praised the professionalism of Brioni in producing the suits. Quote, it all arrived immaculately, the insides are light, the material soft, and everything looks tailor-made. Which, revealing that Brioni produced made-to-measure rather than bespoke suits. It seems like what they're saying here is that Brioni could have produced bespoke suits for James Bond, but they opted not to because of the sheer scale of the amount of suits that they needed to produce, so they had to go with made-to-measure. And the difference between made-to-measure and bespoke is that with bespoke you have at least 2 fittings, if not more, and made-to-measure they just measure you once and then they make a suit out of it and they give it to you. I could see, like, with the difference in scale and production and the complexity of the scenes beginning to increase and evolve in the James Bond franchise, that they're looking to get more quantity of suits for more action scenes and stuff, where Sean Connery only had 2 to 3 suits made for him, 1 for him, and maybe 1 or 2 for a stuntman, because it was, 1, also a smaller budget, but also 2, because they could afford the luxury of not having to have as many suits be made, so that they could have better quality suits which were more bespoke rather than made to measure. So it's kind of a bit of a trade-off. Unfortunately, you're trading off quality. David Lister in The Independent also condemned the decision, claiming that Fleming would be doing somersaults in his grave. James Bond, the epitome of British sophistication and style, is to wear a nifty Italian suit and drive a German sports car. In GoldenEye, he wears a suit adapted from Brioni's Agosto range that is reflective of his status as having been previously a Navy commander, which is a double-breasted blazer cut with straight pockets and 6 brass buttons. and double vents. Hemming explained that Jansen had 9 main outfits, Jansen the actor, mainly black, inspired by the shape of the dresses designed by French designers Thierry Mugler and Claude Montana, as well as the British-born designer John Galliano, which, if you know, he was previously the creative director of Givenchy and Dior, as well as Maison Margiela, but she also wore Prada as well, Jansen did. The hats worn by Xenia in GOLDENEYE, another Bond girl, were sourced from a Maliner named Philip Somerville, and if you don't know, Maliners make these elaborate headpieces or hat pieces that are worn to fancy British events. And her shoes were sourced from Jimmy Choo. So at this point, you actually haven't really seen too much of things being sourced from more modern fashion houses and luxury fashion houses, such as Chanel, Dior, Givenchy, and etc, etc. But now, at this time and era, I think beginning with Pierce Brosnan in the Bond franchise is when we start to see that more of these mainstream brands filter into the movie and they're relying on more of their clothes for this. And in a way, it's almost like they're becoming more standardized, the clothes are, because they're relying more on these luxury brands. And it seems like, whereas before they were relying on more bespoke suits, they're relying now on more made-to-measure, so things are coming more and more, I feel like, as this franchise moves forward towards Daniel Craig's era, everything becomes more off the peg. Hemming explained, "I have no objection to Bond girls spilling out of their halter necks. Oh no, no, no. We were approached by a lot of designers doing plasticky things, but I didn't want the film to be fixed at such a fashion moment." And once again, another designer also states that she wants her designs in the movie to be timeless. And it's something that you definitely don't really notice, but it is definitely important for the designers to make this kind of decision about, because you don't want your characters to look like some kind of laughing stock when someone watches this movie like 30 years down the line, because there are certain things we look back in time with fashion and we certainly laugh at, like the 80s massively padded shoulder pads and the 70s bell bottoms. With such a sleek character and image that Bond has, that's probably something they would want to be more conservative about. Continuing with the quote, "The 80s Bond films look incredibly dated. The vintage Sean Connery films don't. This is somewhat ironic given Hemming's desire to distance the costumes from the 1970s Bond girl look. One of the most distinctive costumes worn by Xenia is from the Monte Carlo casino scene, with the mood board created by Hemming including the note, 'Cruella DeVille meets Morticia Adams,' which is a very interesting concept. It was made from a black panne velvet. The gown is a floor-length and high-necked with a structured bodice that is seamed to emphasize Jansen's bust. The production notes propose that the dress is reminiscent of the Wicked Queen character in the Snow White. Very whimsical. Our other notable costumes created for Xenia were inspired by the military and included a lycra crepe catsuit and an olive green uniform. For her combat costume worn in the jungle, Hemming dressed Xenia in a mesh vest with shoulder pads, with satin combat trousers with heavy-duty zips made of jumbo plastic and Harley-Davidson boots. Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997, and we're continuing with Brioni once again, and Hemming as the costume designer. Other notable costumes for Brosnan in Tomorrow Never Dies includes Bond's dark leather military jacket, which is actually also one of Hemming's favorite costumes in the movie. She says, "It is a really lovely leather jacket which I had made. I took an old German Second World War jacket and stole some ideas off of it. I made sure that we got some really old, oily leather. Yuck." 5 copies were made of the jacket, and Brosnan wore it with khaki army fatigue trousers, a top from Nap and Knock, which looks like Jean Paul Gaultier crossed with ex-naval marine sweater with a zip down the front, and a TSC cashmere polo. It is in Tomorrow Never Dies that Bond wears a full Navy Royal Commander's dress uniform, the first time since Moore in The Spy Who Loved Me. The villain, Elliot Carver, aka Jonathan Pryce, the actor, was originally named Sir Elliot Harmsway in early script draft. The name Harmsway is a reference to Alfred Harmsworth, the first Viscount Northcliffe, a British newspaper and publishing magnate who held vast influence over publishing popular opinion in the Edwardian era. Hemming was also inspired by Robert Maxwell, the late media tycoon and costuming Carver, explaining that, quote, "He is a minimalist monster, and we figured that even though he could wear anything he wanted, this sort of man would go to a tailor and say,
'Give me 10 identical suits. I never want to look different.'" End quote.
Hemming interpreted Carver's costume differently from the script, and his suits and black leather shoes were sourced from Kenzo's 1997 spring collection. Made of black nylon drill fabric, they were selected to reflect elements of Nehru and Mao suits. But beneath the suits, Carver wears a black polo shirt designed by Prada. The costume worn by Carver's wife, Paris, aka Terry Hatcher, was designed by a Italo-Brazilian designer named the Engineer by Vogue, who later became famous for designing dresses for the fashion house Lanvin. With it, Paris wore the highest heeled black Gucci shoes. The only reason Hatcher can stand in them is that they have a platform in the front. David Morris provided Paris's jewelry, which is a 25-carat diamond collar necklace made from platinum, later termed the Bond necklace. Hemming chose to dress the extras performing as waiting staff in newspaper print dresses and suit jackets, and Hemming explained her inspiration behind them as such. I found a photograph of a woman lying down on the floor with a load of newspapers covering her private parts. I said to the producer, Barbara Broccoli, I would like to create Playboy bunny girls, but with newspapers. Every piece which is on the costumes had to be made up by my assistants from friends' photograph albums, so we could not be accused of stealing copyright. With 10 pages of fictional news stories. We had them printed on calico and chose girls with large cup sizes to wear them. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine making your own newspaper and then it's being printed on a suit jacket where maybe one person will read the text on it? But I suppose that one person could sue you if you're using their work. But is it actually plagiarism if you're putting it on a dress that you created? I suppose it could be interpreted as such. But it's interesting. She actually used her friends' family photo albums to make the photos and the stories around things. I love that. That is just so creative and next level extra. The character of Wai Lin was played by Malaysian actress Michelle Yeoh, renowned for performing her own stunts, which is crazy. The producers and the studio were absolutely against forcing her to become a cleavage and thigh revealing girl for this reason. In keeping with her character's profession, she was given the role of a secret agent employed by the Chinese People's Security Force and the Chinese equivalent of Bond. It's funny how like all the other Bond girls, even like the rough one, Pam Bouvier, they were trying to make her really tough and hard, but then she broke down to be just like any other Bond girl. But with Michelle Yeoh, because she does her own stunts, people were actually like, oh no, we can't make her a Bond girl. It's hypocrisy at its finest here. Hemming dressed her in a distinctive red Prada leather jacket, white crop t-shirt, and cotton trousers with cream-colored pumps, sourced from No Name for the motorbike scene. There's also a cat suit worn by Wai Lin during the cocktail party. Hemming created it from a mood board that demonstrates the two key inspirations behind its design, namely Kathy Gale's and Emma Peel's leather suits worn in the Avengers. Which makes sense. Catwoman. The World Is Not Enough, 1999. Costume designer is Hemming, with Pierce Brosnan as the actor for Bond. About Elektra King, one of the Bond girls. Bond is sent on a mission to protect her. The costume reflects the subtle transformation of her character from damsel in distress to the film's lead villain. And behind this, Hemming explained her approach as Elektra has a leaning toward East, so we've added little ethnic ingredients to all of her costumes. We always tried to go with an option with the embroidery on it or some jewelry, just keep pushing her in that direction so it all adds an extra dimension to that character when you watch the film. The costume that Hemming designed for Elektra in the casino scene was inspired by the cartoon character Jessica Rabbit. Stereotypical red floor-length gown with a sweetheart neckline. It was actually made by hand. Hemming has written that there's a see-through bodice and a lilac-colored slip wraparound skirt made from a satin fabric by Versace. And 5 of these dresses were made. On Hemming's main costume design for Jones, one of the other Bond girls, it is headed Nuclear Decommissioning Underground. So she's taking her inspiration from Lara Croft from the Tomb Raiders. Hemming's description includes an olive drab French Connection vest cropped and stonewashed over black La Perla bra, nylon swim shorts sourced from Thomas Mann, a webbing belt with mini Geiger counter, and caterpillar boots and socks. Created by Toby Gard of Core Design, Croft's classic costume for the first 3 Tomb Raider video games was a turquoise tank top, light brown combat boots, white socks, and calf high boot. Jones's surname is possibly another direct reference to Croft, Lara Croft in Tomb Raider, in that the character was an aristocratic English archaeologist and was based in part on the character Dr. Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, Jones, the Bond girl. Denise Richards, the actual actress for Jones, is quoted as, "When we first see Denise, she gets out of a protective white suit she wears when working in a nuclear facility. If she were a real nuclear physicist, she'd probably wear a pair of tracksuit bottoms and a t-shirt underneath, but we went for a pair of really tight shorts and a cropped vest because she has to act in that way for the rest of the sequence, and we wanted a more sexy look." End quote. There's critical reception with that.
Although it's endearing that she plays a nuclear physicist who wears tank tops and micro shorts to handle plutonium, perhaps the joke is that Bond, the unrepentant lech that he is, can still have his bimbos as long as they sport a PhD and a little something else.
Which is a little bit harsh. Summing up most of the reviewers' thoughts, Rob Dieters and Jeff Hammer stated, quote, "Ever wonder what scientists wear under those white suits you use to protect yourself from radiation? Well, apparently it's skin-tight tank tops and hot pants that are the dress code in the nuclear community." End quote. Hemming was later hired to design the costumes for the first film adaptation of the Tomb Raider as well, Lara Croft Tomb Raider in 2001. Which is pretty ironic. But she also stated, "It was a hard one. You've got an actor, Angelina Jolie, trying to play the role of someone who already exists in everyone's mind. You have to make her look fashionable and original, but keep within the preconceptions and avoid upsetting anyone." Die Another Day, 2002. Costume decisions were made by Hemming, and Brosnan continues on again. There's an interesting reference to fashion that is in the script here with a little bit of context. On Bond entering the Peninsular Hotel in Hong Kong, the character asks Mr. Chang, a Chinese intelligence agent masquerading as the hotel's manager, to send up my tailor. This is interesting because Mr. Chang is actually named after a real person. He's named after an actual tailor who's pretty famous in China. Chang's surname and the setting of the scene in the Peninsular Hotel is a direct reference to the Chinese tailor Mr. Chang, who moved from Fenghua to Shanghai to train under a master shirt maker before leaving for Hong Kong in 1949. In 1953, Chang set up his first tailoring shop, Ascot Chang, and then in 1963, he actually opened up his first branch in the Peninsular Hotel. So it's interesting because the secret agent Bond is talking to is called Dr. Chang, and they're in the Peninsular Hotel where he actually set up his first branch. The tailoring firm has since become one of Hong Kong's leading tailors. For the film's villain, Hemming approached costuming Graves' luxury wardrobe, which was very traditional, classic, but very modern. He wears suits by Gucci and Dolce & Gabbana, and also a Vivienne Westwood overcoat. And like I said before, we usually do not see this many luxury brands on a single person. Previously it was maybe like Dior here, or Chanel there, or Prada there, but now we have all of these designers being being put into the costume choices, and there's an interesting rise in the use of luxury in the films at this point. He had all the modern expensive designer wear, including Prada shoes, cufflinks by Teteosen. We didn't try to make him look unusual, just really chic and svelte. Hemming's decision to dress Graves in expensive costumes is reflective of how Drax's clothing is described in Fleming's novel on Bond's initial meeting with the character in Blades. Quote, "Bond concluded his inspection with Drax's clothes, which were expensive and in excellent taste, with modest cufflinks which looked like Cartier and a plain gold Patek Philippe watch with a black leather strap." End quote. Graves actually wears two suits in the film, a two-piece dark pinstripe suit tailored by Gucci on arriving by parachute outside Buckingham Palace, and an elegant black double-breasted two-piece dinner suit tailored by Dolce & Gabbana during the Ice Palace cocktail party. When outside the Ice Palace to introduce Icarus's power, Graves wears the full-length charcoal-colored fur-trimmed overcoat sourced by Vivienne Westwood. In this movie, Halle Berry stars as Jink Johnson, and she directly references Honey Rider's entrance in Dr. No. Honey emerges from the sea in a two-piece swimsuit as Bond watches through binoculars. So if you remember Ursula, not from The Little Mermaid, but Ursula undressed from Dr. No when she came out in a bikini for the first time, and she was creating so many waves on the beach because she was bringing to new levels the heights of feminine sexuality. All the reception was saying because she was wearing a bikini. And it was a white bikini that was made from one of her own bras that only cost them like £6 to make. Halle Berry is now recreating that and referencing that scene by wearing a similar dress, but in a different color. According to Hemming, Halle and I both agreed that she didn't suit a white bikini like the one Andress wore, so the designer requested a color to suit Barry's skin tone instead, and La Perla provided one in orange. This is at odds with Jinx's final costume in the film, which is an ivory bikini, which is Oh my gosh, the hypocrisy!
I'll get you an orange bikini.
And then, last of her scenes.
Here, wear this white bikini.
Oh, okay. Now, I don't know if that was met with conflict by Hallie, because she didn't want that earlier. 10 versions of the orange bikini were made, and Patrick Whittaker and Care Malin were employed to construct the white leather belt with individual J fastenings worn with it. 3 copies of the belt were created, each costing 400 pounds and taking 3 days to hand make. Interesting how, like, the production time and the value to make this belt increase is so belabored when in the original scene the belt for Ursula was literally just ripped off a naval officer and just counted as overboard. During the cliff scene when Jinx dives backwards off the edge on a high wall and lands in the ocean as the clinic's guards shoot at her from above, it actually is supposed to echo a cutscene from Tomb Raider again. Jinx's platinum diamond encrusted pink gown during the ice cocktail party was the best borrow of the film, according to Hemming, because she persuaded Donatella Versace herself to make the dress so that they could make it a wow thing. They're describing the gown as like wearing a Ferrari, and Barry later paid tribute to the costume by wearing an Atelier Versace 007 inspired gown. I wanted to go as a Bond girl, and this is what Donatella came up with, Barry explained. Miranda Frost is the bad Bond girl in this movie, but in an earlier script draft, she was supposed to be called Gala Brand. And there were many references to Brand's character as being icy in the script, but this is also presumably why the name Miranda Frost was chosen after the name of Gala Brand was just tossed out. For example, Bond.
Hey, are you going to Iceland?
Gala, in an icy tone of voice.
You should know when to back off, Mr. Bond.
Inspired by the synonyms of icy to describe Brand's character in the script, Hemming explained that Frost had a much more cool and hard look, and therefore Armani was the obvious choice to bring a cool, elegant Grace Kelly-style glamour to the character. Armani provided a tailored suit for Frost, and Frost wears another Armani outfit when she reveals herself as being a double agent to Bond. The clearest allusion to the icy description comes from the form of Frost's blue and crystal evening gown worn during the cocktail party, and directly contrasts in color and style to that of Jinx. It included Swarovski hanging crystals in the shape of icicles and snowflakes in the crystal neckline that were designed to catch light from the chandeliers. For the outfits worn by extras, Fendi provided 50 pieces of couture. For the extras' jewelry, the production borrowed a selection from Tiffany & Co., and Hemming noted on filming of the cocktail party scenes, it was a big dollar day. A lot of crowd, a lot of jewelry, a lot of evening wear, a lot of fur. Which, dang. Do you know how much a fur jacket actually costs? Maybe they could be using fake fur, but if they were using real fur, that could be easily 20 grand a fur jacket or coat is. And Tiffany & Co. is expensive. They're out there selling a paperclip for like hundreds of dollars. Not to mention that Fendi provided not just regular ready-to-wear, but 50 pieces of couture. That's expensive, which is probably going to cost at least tens of thousands of dollars per thing. Now we finally enter the modern era of Daniel Craig, who is the current Bondsman at the time of me filming this. There will probably be more Bond films because it never seems like they're gonna end, and I don't know if it's possible for them to really end, and I don't think there's anything to stop them either, because probably they're gonna retire Daniel Craig and someone else is gonna come take his place. But I have a little soft spot for Daniel Craig because I watched The Glass Onion, the Netflix movie where he starred in. So Casino Royale in 2006 stars Daniel Craig for the first time with the same costume designer Hemming. In keeping with Hemming's approach to tailoring Brosnan, she wanted Craig to look contemporary but classic too. Due to Craig's skin tone and coloring, Hemming decided to use mainly blue. Nearly everything he has got is navy, pale blue, gray, mid-gray, and black. Bond in the script sourced from La Perla's Grigio Perla Lodato range. The blue swimming trunks worn by Bond is ready to wear from La Perla's Grigio La Perla Lodato in spring-summer 2006, and Hemming made the decision to dress Craig in trunks due to his physique and to playfully flip the traditional gaze of the audience from the Bond girls to Bond. So when Ursula and Halle Berry were coming out of the sea wearing bikini, now they have Daniel Craig walking out of the sea sexily in swimming trunks. So, female sexualization has now become male sexualization. An interesting reverse in the script, and one that should be done more often because women appreciate a good physique as well. According to Hemming, I knew he would look really sexy in them. Why should it always be the girls in bikinis? I meant it to be like that. It's meant to be a joke between us all that there is often someone coming out of the sea in a Bond film, and I said, well, if someone's coming out of the sea, They have to look as sexy as Ursula Andress, end quote. Hemming remarked that her approach was to discuss with the manufacturers and style people what they would be producing for the next collections, and, quote, we go and see them and see what samples they've got and what they're going to be making. Often with designers like Versace and Dolce & Gabbana, they were willing to make things in different colors out of their own collections because they know they would get big exposure just about the time when their clothes are out. It's fantastic for them, end quote. On the cost of costuming the cast from designer labels, Hemming used the example of the Armani leather jacket worn by Craig in the film as, quote, the jacket was $4,000 when I saw it in Los Angeles, so I talked to Armani and they said, yes, okay, we'll make it for you. And I thought, oh no, we'll never be able to afford this. 25 copies of the jacket were needed. Ugh. You can see how the budget goes up, but you know, they made them for me in the factory and they only charged me something like 400 euros each, end quote. Which is crazy because they're gonna charge them like $4,000 for one. They only ended up charging 400 euros each for them, and 400 euros is 434 US dollars. So that's a tenth of the cost. They still ended up paying over 8 grand, probably closer to 10 grand for the 25 suit jackets. In this movie, they're also continuing with the Brioni suits. Back in Vesper's bathroom, Bond opens the door. A bag hung from his finger. She doesn't turn from the mirror. Bond.
I have a tuxedo.
Vesper.
I've seen it. There are tuxedos, dear, and there are tuxedos. This is the latter, and I need you looking like a man who belongs at that table.
Bond.
How? It's tailored.
Vesper.
Oh, I sized you up the moment we met.
During the poker game, the villain Le Chiffre, aka Mads Mikkelsen, is costumed in a flamboyant Brioni black velvet dinner jacket with a black shirt, crushed velvet waistcoat, and black wool trousers. And the jacket is supposed to be reminiscent of other film villains, denoted by their wearing of crushed velvet smoking jacket in film. Quantum of Solace in 2008. In September 2006, it was reported that Brioni would be launching a limited edition Brioni for James Bond dinner suit to coincide with the release of Casino Royale, retailing at $6,000. But Brioni wasn't supposed to do that without permission, and this would actually be their downfall. The Brioni jacket was described as, quote, the jacket is lined with a special silver 007 print and will include a personalized numbered label. That's just the beginning. A series of espionage features include a gun holster in the left label, waterproof document holders in the shoulders, and hidden pockets in the plackets, and a knife case to fold, sealed with Velcro in the lining of the sleeve, end quote. Pretty gimmicky. Dave Leckie explains that Brioni had no formal arrangement with Eon Productions. The fashion house provided all of Bond's wardrobe in exchange for the right to use his name in public relation materials. Therefore, accepting these materials such as glossy images and collection catalogs and other posters in stores, Brioni was not permitted to use the Bond brand through creating and marketing Bond-themed products as to make financial gain. And if you remember with Goldfinger, Eon Productions does not take copyright infringement lightly. They will cut you off. And that's kind of what happened here, because it was a violation of their said agreement. Although there is no evidence to suggest a lawsuit was filed against Brioni by Eon Productions, likely due to the unfavorable attention that it would attract, the productions company's wrath quickly became evident. Rumors that Bond would not be dressed in Brioni for Quantum of Solace arose in early 2008, with Simon Goodley questioning, does Bond not trust his tailor? I see that Daniel Craig has been strutting his stuff at the Oscars wearing a suit from Dunhill. There was a brief speculation that Dunhill might possibly tailor Craig for Quantum of Solace. The reporter also noted that at a GQ of the Man photo shoot, the actor refused an entire rack of designer suits and insisted on a Tom Ford bespoke suit, the actor being Daniel Craig. Indeed, it was announced by the Times on the 10th of March in 2008 that 007 has switched allegiances. James Bond is forsaking tuxedos made by the heartbreakingly expensive Brioni, and Tom Ford has won the license to twill. Tom Ford being one of the previous creative directors for Gucci, and I talked about it in my Gucci analysis and brand history video, as well as of the Gucci movie, so check it out, it's on my channel. Tom Ford, formerly the creative director for women's wear at Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent, aka YSL, opened up his first menswear store on Madison Avenue, New York in April 2007, and it has been alleged that Craig was one of his first clients. According to Eon Productions, the decision to hire Tom Ford to supply Bond's suits had nothing to do with tensions that may have arisen between the company and Brioni, but rather the establishment of Craig in the role of Bond. According to Keith Snellgrove, director for product placement,
it was time for a change, and whereas Brioni is very polished, this new Bond is edgier and darker. Tom Ford tailored suits work better for him.
Sony for Casino Royale was like asking, well, why can't we have Daniel Craig wear something more gritty and more edgy for Bond? Eon Productions then said that this is edgy and gritty. Brioni is. We'll keep using them. So it seems like there is actually a little bit of tension. They're BSing it with their publicity and PR because they had a falling out. DeSimone declaring, "This is not our policy. We were chosen for our art, never our money." Meaning that Brioni did not ever pay to be the tailor for James Bond. They were chosen because of their skill, not because they bribed them. DeSimone further stated,
"There's never been a Brioni advertisement featuring Brosnan or Craig."
Yet of course there was. So they're just trying to hide their history with their ex because they got a new beau in town, which is Tom Ford. Got some baggage there. To make Bond movies have a more modern feel, the production design for Quantum of Solace is based completely around a monochromatic black and white color scheme, which works to highlight the striking contrast between the individual characters and the film's narrative. Ford's approach towards tailoring Craig was explained as,
quote, "He has a very large face, so we had to make sure that the suit and suit collars were in proportion, and you need to think about the fabric. It can't pucker around the shoulders or collar even very slightly because on camera it would really stand out." End quote.
Which is true. They always say that the camera makes you gain 10 pounds, so why wouldn't it be more noticeable? But it's so terrible that they described him as having quite a large face. It's like calling someone having a big head. It kind of makes you feel a little bit embarrassed, like, geez. Ford stated that his company made about 420 pieces for 11 costume changes.
Absolutely insane.
For each scene, they made 3 suits that were perfect and 3 suits that were bloody, blown up, and had been in a pool. But most of those different combinations and varieties were for the stuntmen, too. Del Smith has explained the process for what his mindset is behind tailoring for a film production compared to a regular client, and he describes it as such. Quote, "The tailors that get chosen today are usually picked because the stylist/costume designer knows them. Another factor is that filmmakers are likely to go with whoever is willing to pay and are able to tailor suits as quickly as possible for a production. The stylist would normally expect a tailor to turn around the order in about 3 weeks. Then you have to arrange fittings with the actors, and it's not unusual to only get 2 with an actor due to their unavailability. Often you have to turn to a studio to conduct the fitting and wait for the actor to become available." End quote. So because of this process, Smiths argues that it was highly likely that Tom Ford's suits were actually made to measure rather than bespoke, like I said. And the same thing was with the Brioni suits too. They were made to measure rather than bespoke. This is partly because of the amount of suits they need to make, and it's also unlikely that Daniel Craig himself would have been able to visit Tom Ford's workshop for the fittings, and that's what he would have had to do if it was bespoke. In the pre-credit sequence, Bond is involved in a car chase that follows on immediately from the final scenes in Casino Royale. There is a significant continuity error here. Bond is not dressed in his 3-piece Brioni suit, worn at the end of Casino Royale, but rather a 2-piece Tom Ford suit. Besides this, the main differences between the suits include the fabric. In Casino Royale, the suit's stripes are light gray, and in Quantum of Solace, they are light blue pinstripes. So they were probably already on their way out. Brioni was, and Tom Ford was already on his way in. Spazer explains the key differences. The Brioni suit jacket has straight shoulders with a healthy amount of shoulder padding, whereas the Tom Ford suit jacket is much more softer pagoda. They kind of curve up like a pagoda roof. Shoulders, which have a slight concave shape. And the Tom Ford jacket has more of a defined waist, and further so, the trousers have a slimmer cut, the shirt is lighter in shade, and there's a different tie pattern of blue and black squares, rather than the honeycomb, which were both sourced from Tom Ford. However, given the issues between Eon Productions and Brioni, it is most likely that the decision was made for a completely fresh start for Quantum of Solace. In the movie, Bond tracks Green, the villain, to Austria, where Green attends a performance of Giacomo Puccini's Tosca. It is during these scenes when the monochrome design is at the most stylish in terms of costume. Not being appropriately attired to attend the opera, Bond steals a midnight blue dinner suit from the wardrobe department backstage. And Spazer believes that the mohair cashmere dinner suit takes influence from the Anthony Sinclair tailored dinner suit that Connery wears in Dr. No with the Lay Ambassadors Club. As with Connery, Craig's jacket has a shawl collar with jetted pockets, double vents, gauntlet cuffs, and all faced with black silk. The shirt and tie are also reflective of Connery's costume as well. Both Connery and Craig's jackets also include a white linen pocket square placed in the breast pocket. With Agent Strawberry Fields, it is implied that Bond obtains Fields' dress in the hotel's boutique, and this is reminiscent of Bond purchasing Kara's opera coat and gown in the Living Daylights movie and Vesper's gown in Casino Royale. So in that way, this scene kind of mimics Craig and Dalton. The dress itself is sourced from Prada and is a black dress with a gray silver panel and bow detail in the front. Camille, too, is also another Bond girl who is dressed at the party in a black Prada Prada dress. Frogly from Brioni explained that the company was incredibly helpful and made 20 identical dresses for us in 1 week. Although the dress was created as a one-off, unique special version for Quantum of Solace, Prada has continually used this in variations every season. So it must be a very classic design, and they just tweaked it slightly for the film. At the end, Bond and M have come to reflect each other in their costume choices, whereas at the beginning they didn't get along, both in terms of their color and fabric. The costumes work to demonstrate that Bond and M have come to an understanding and can mutually respect one another, and this is reflected in their monochromatic mirroring in their individual costumes. For the production of Skyfall, costume designer Janie Tamim came on board for Daniel Craig. Tamim is very notable because she actually designed costumes for the Harry Potter film franchise. One of her notable quotes is, "When I was designing, I knew I was going to have a suit, a sportswear outfit, a bathing suit, a tuxedo, but the interesting thing we had to do was make it fresh, and especially in 2012 with the 50th anniversary of James Bond." It's crazy that James Bond, at the point of Skyfall, was becoming over 50 years old, but in that time they've had Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, and now Daniel Craig. So they've roughly had about one actor every decade or so. It's actually quite amazing that the Bond franchise has withstood the test of time as long as it has, even though they do at their core may still have some pretty conservative values in their characterization of the Bond girls. Tamim outlined some of the costume suggestions Craig made in relation to his suits, namely a slim fitting suit tailored very near to the body, and this is crazy because the suits just get so tight from Skyfall onwards after Tom Ford started tailoring for them here. Quote, "Daniel wanted a suit you could forget, a suit that wasn't on top of his body but moving with his body." Skyfall 2012. The film opens in Istanbul with Bond and female agent Naomi Harris, who is later revealed to be Eve Moneypenny. Tamim explains that the cufflink adjustment was actually Craig's idea. The cufflinks for Skyfall were designed by Tom Ford and included the Bond family crest. After the opening credits, he was asked to look really shoddy, so she dressed him in a leather jacket from Levi's vintage Menlo collection. The jacket was distressed, so it would look shoddy as per Daniel's request. With the jacket, he wears a light blue shirt that is actually sourced from Zara, and shoes also from Zara as well, which I kind of find ridiculous. You're on this like multi-million-dollar production and then you buy clothes as a costume designer from Zara. It's kind of funny. But I also am disappointed that they didn't source something that wasn't fast fashion, because fast fashion is terrible. And I don't think we need to be contributing to it on a film production where we eventually are going to throw it away after the film production, most likely. I also just think for the level of caliber of James Bond, I think they should invest in better quality clothing pieces. Like, how disappointed as a viewer would you be if you're watching these movies and you realize that they're just dressing them in cheap clothing? And I think she continues to use Zara a couple times. On arriving in Shanghai to track down Patrice, Bond masquerades as a chauffeur. Tamim explains that Bond's coat idea was Craig's idea, Daniel Craig, telling her, quote, "I want to have a blue pea coat. I know Billy Reed makes very nice ones." End quote. The navy coat was actually made from wool and has peak lapels and a single vent with natural horn buttons. Billy Reed himself provided 20 coats for the scene, which is crazy, but not surprising anymore at this point. 5 size large and 15 medium. The 15 medium ones were for hero shots where he's not really moving around too much, and the large size ones were for stunts and movement because you gotta move around in them, and if they're like stiff material that's not forgiving at all like wool is, that's what usually is in a pea coat, you're not really gonna have the full range of movement that you need. Also, it helps to be comfortable too. When Skyfall's villain, Raul Silva, aka Javier Bardem, introduces himself to Bond, he is dressed in a Tom Sweeney ivory 3-piece suit with a floral patterned Prada shirt. On the Prada shirt, Tamim noted that she was addicted to it, so quote, because, quote, "It had the right level of lightness and expensiveness. I'm not gonna call it bad taste. The graphic of the shirt is beautiful, but it's not Bond. A gentleman wouldn't wear that. I did Silva's entire costume around that shirt," end quote. Interesting how Tamim, along with, I can't remember if it was Hemmings or the costume designer who did the Miami Vice. There's been so many costume designers. I'm getting lost on all the names here. But they're both using the villain as a way to express their outlet in terms of costume and outlets, because the Bond man himself cannot have such drastic fashion items because it doesn't really suit him historically, and we can see that as over the course of time with Roger Moore in his safari suits, and then before when Sean Connery was wearing like the blue terry cloth play suit. Those things have not quite dated well on Bond, and they're kind of looked back upon as fashion faux pas. So it makes sense that they can't really experiment too much with Bond, which is kind of a shame. So they're trying to keep it more classic and formal for Bond typically. But then with the villains, they can have this more like metrosexual, almost flamboyancy to them, and like the costume designers really seem to, at least with Tamim and the costume designer who did Miami Vice, they really get to express their creativity, because she dressed him in an orchid shirt, and then Tamim is dressing him into a floral pattern from Prada that she would never dare think to put on Bond, she's saying. Over Bond and Sylvia's interactions with one another, their costumes adopt another trope which has become familiar in Craig Bond's films, the villain being dressed in light colors and Bond being dressed in dark to provide an ironic flip between hero and villain, though I think it is also too that Bond tends to dress in dark colors, so it only would make sense to put the villain in the lighter colors, whereas Bond is a lot more conservative and traditional. You're not really going to want to put that on him because it doesn't look as good on him. So that's where the villain comes in and you get more creativity with dressing him. Tamim designed Severine's dress with some input from Marlowe, and based on the style of Rita Hayworth's black dress in the movie Gilda, it's a similar silhouette to the gown worn by Helga Brandt in You Only Live Twice, one of the Bond movies. The dress took 6 friggin' months to make, meaning that the work would have started in May of 2011, and then Tamim had the responsibility in how the dress would be created and looked rather than the scriptwriters themselves, which is actually interesting. She's getting a lot more autonomy here. The dress took so long because it had over 60,000 Swarovski crystals. Swarovski was actually an official licensee for Skyfall. It's interesting because in previous films they also had Swarovski dresses, but this is the first time they've actually become an official licensee because they're going big or go home. This time they're using $600,000 worth of product, and Swarovski is really trying to hit hard by making it all bedazzled in their product and getting their product literally put in your face because it's probably going to be shining so much light, because damn. Tamim revealed that, quote, "We had to make 6 different versions of the body so that Berenice could change twice a day during the filming, and each time she changed, we had to sew the body into the main part of the dress while she was wearing it." Can you imagine? It was so delicate. The first time you see the dress from the back, you see this beautiful tattoo effect across the sheer fabric, which we dyed to match her skin tone to suggest that she was naked. This is my, quote, Bond girl, and she had to look fantastic, end quote. Like, that's another level of dedication. Dyeing the mesh so it matches the individual actress's skin color. I mean, we all have different skin colors, so it's crazy that she would actually do that rather than just find a similar looking enough mesh that would just match her skin tone. Like, how do you even find the dye? That's like another probably several hours just looking for the correct color, pigment, and matching it to the actress's skin tone. So this dress was massive for Swarovski, I mean. But can you also imagine how much work this dress must have been for the film? Because they had to sew the torso of the dress onto the main part of it while she was wearing it, which to me means that it was not a fully finished piece and had to be taken on and off in pieces rather than one bigger whole dress. And I can imagine the reason, possibly, I speculate why they did this, is probably because it was probably a very honking heavy dress, because 600,000 Swarovski crystals, that's probably a lot of weight. And also too, they probably want the dress to be fixable, because if you make the dress in many pieces, it's easier to fix rather than having to dismantle the entire dress just to fix if a few crystals fell off in an area. Also, can you just imagine how much this dress would be worth? Especially with nails and stuff and rings and other jewelry. I would be so scared that I would snag my dress and then crystals would come flying off like bing, 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 bing. Okay, maybe that's an exaggeration, but you get the idea. In one of the fashion-led scenes, Severine.
Would you mind if I asked you a business question?
Bond.
Depends on the question.
Severine.
It has to do with death.
Bond.
A subject in which you're well versed.
Severine.
And how would you know that?
Bond.
Only a certain kind of woman wears a backless dress with a Beretta 70 strapped to her thigh.
Severin.
One can never be too careful when handsome men in tuxedo carry Walthers.
The dialogue offers another reference to Dr. No and Fleming's novels in that a Beretta 70 was the model issued to replace the previous version, which was a Beretta 25. And the one that Bond uses before is replaced with a Walther PPK at M's request. It shows a direct comparison between Pam Bouvier in License to Kill, who wore a Beretta strapped to her thigh under her rip-away dress, if you guys recall, with Moneypenny. Moneypenny is dressed in a white shirt, and her black leather trousers are sourced from J brand. She wears an Omega Aquaterra watch. An Omega is a very expensive high-end brand, much like Rolex. At the end of the film, Mallory is dressed in the most traditional suit he wears in Skyfall, a double-breasted navy suit made from heavy woolen flannel cloth, and Mallory is the new M and Bond's new boss. This costume works to affirm his status as the new M and Bond's boss. By way of comparison, in this scene, Bond is dressed in a navy herringbone suit, also same color, with a light blue shirt compared to Mallory's mid blue shirt. These pairings work to demonstrate the pair's mutual respect for one another that has grown over the course of the film, similar to Quantum of Solace. And like I said earlier, Omega continued to have a sponsorship partnership with the brand, with producing TV advertisements that featured Craig and Marlowe as brand ambassadors, and creating two special watches, a 50th anniversary version released on February 22nd, 2012, and a limited edition Skyfall watch to be released at the same time as the film. Limited edition male watch retailed around $4,760, which isn't that bad in terms of watches. It's very expensive still, but watches can be $9,000 or $30,000 in the case of Patek Philippe sometimes. Spectre 2015. Tom Ford, of course, retained contact to make his suits for Daniel Craig, and with similar crew such as Tamim again. Along with Tom Ford, Daniel Craig expressed a desire to be costumed in Brunello Cucinelli for Spectre, and Tamim agreed. Like in the movie Skyfall, Tamim decided to continue the deliberate and ironic contrast between the villain and Bond in Spectre. Bond's Day of the Dead costume consists of a black lightweight coat and includes a white pattern in the shape of a skeleton painted into the fabric, and the vertebrae is printed on the black tie, which is pretty cool. The ribcage, vertebrae, and the hip bones are also painted on the back of the coat. The coattails itself include the leg bones, and the sleeves have the arm bones printed on the sides. To top this off with a cherry on top, he also wears a skull mask and a skull-headed cane. The costume designer Tamim explained that, quote, he had to look like James Bond in a crowd. We fitted different coats on him before I found an early 20th century coat that we remade before painting on the skeleton. I then found a top hat, and we had a mask specially made because it had to be articulated. You had to see his eyes in close-up. Daniel's eyes are very recognizable, end quote. After Bond travels to Rome, he attends Sciarra's funeral. Tamim said that of the shirt that the collar is more Italian in style, it is more Bond in disguise. She also said, I changed some details for the suit as Bond was in a lot of different situations, so the suit had to reflect the situation he was in. There's a scene in Rome, and he had to look like one of the other Italians, so he disguised him to fit in with the other Italian men there. Which is interesting because, if you remember, everyone wanted Bond to be the epitome of British men, and now since Bond has crossed into the territory of Brioni, which is an Italian menswear clothing brand, he's tried other things besides British clothing. He's tried Italian clothing and German sports cars. So why wouldn't he change his outfit a little bit to blend in with the surroundings? At the inside of the dining carriage train at night, Daniel added a red carnation to the buttonhole, and Tamim actually was trying to deny that she was inspired by Connery's dinner jacket in Goldfinger, but it seems like Daniel Craig was, at least, by adding it. It's not very often Bond seems to wear white, but when he does, it does make quite an impact and something to remember, such as this. And when costuming Blofeld with the Nehru jacket, he wears a pair of pale gray Margiela trousers. And Blofeld's shoes are actually from the Fianda slipper range designed by Bottega Veneta that are made from dark navy woven leather. I actually made a video about the brand history of Bottega Veneta. Check it out on my channel, one of the playlists, History of Brands. But Bottega Veneta is very famous for their woven leather shoes, as with their bags. Once again, it's very interesting. You see the villains continue to wear a lot of designer brands, whereas I feel like Tamim explained that for Lucia, one of the Bond girls, she was inspired by Sophia Loren, and the character, quote, had to be dressed like an iconic Italian star, elegant and sculptural against the clean 1930s architecture, end quote. With her knee-length black jersey dress from the back, the main design feature of the dress is the scoop silk detail style that is, once again, she's using this technique that is dyed to the color of Bellucci's skin tone, inclusive of black web detailing that reflects her veil worn during the funeral, and it actually makes her dress appear as though it's backless. With this outfit, Lucia wears a pair of matte black leather Christian Louboutin Socate shoes with 5-inch stiletto heels. The scene in the mechanical workshop also affords for a mega watch product placement, as noted in the script. Q, the character. But you can have this. He hands Bond an understated black strapped Omega watch. Bond, what does it do? Q, it tells the time. Might help with your punctuality issues. The watch that Q offers Bond is an Omega Seamaster 300 Spectre limited edition watch with a steel ornatto strap, retailing at £4,750. Over nearly 60 years, Eon Productions has produced 25 James Bond films, and we've seen a variety of costume designer styles, a range of different characters, and whether or not they've had more liberties over their choosings of dress or not, with some notable ones being Roger Moore, who actually took charge in picking his own tailors and having the most fashion choices and most notable footprints to the Bond image and costume, I would argue. If you love this, as well as all the other James Bond videos that we did, we do a lot of things related to fashion history, and couture on this channel. And also give this video a like so that it can spread to more people, because that's just kind of how the algorithm works. My name is Mimi. I would love if you guys could subscribe and we could get to over 1,000 subs. This is just my goal, and I would love to do bigger things, but first I would love to have you guys here so that I can let you guys pick the next topic that we do on this channel. And this is my way of thanking all my subscribers. And until next time, bye!